Welcome to this episode of Health Reversion. You're here with Adrian, and in this episode we're going to be considering the work of Peter D'Adamo and the book Eat Right for Your Blood Type. Have you eaten according to your blood type? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll be interested to see how that worked out for you. The book Eat Right for Your Blood Type, written by Peter D'Adamo over 20 years ago, considered extensive research on how foods, individual foods, impact the specific blood types. Those being blood type A, blood type B, blood type AB, and blood type O. Now, this book has attracted all kinds of criticism and supposed debunking. Criticisms pertaining to the history and the timelines that are provided in the book as to how long or how old the blood types are and when they came about. And there's also a lot of criticism related to some of the suggestions that D'Adamo makes. For example, there is a suggestion and most recommendations within the O-type blood to consume vast quantities of animal protein. It's kind of like their fuel. But this obviously isn't going to go down well with anybody that has chosen to become a vegetarian or to follow a vegan lifestyle. And considering that 40% of the general population in the United States at least is blood type O, this can certainly get a lot of people upset and averse to any of the recommendations or to even consider the research that D'Adamo has conducted. So to be clear from the outset, I'm not here today recommending the actual blood type diet. I know it's incredibly difficult to stick to such a limited and contracted regime. Rather, today's focus is actually going to be on the research that D'Adamo and his team did into something called lectins. You may have heard of lectins already and the potential impacts that they can have, the adverse impacts that they can have on our health. And that's what this episode and the subsequent 4 episodes on each of the blood types that I'm going to provide is going to be based on. Lectins are a class of proteins that are found in a whole range of foods, but particularly they're found in plants. Lectins bind to cells in the body, and once they bind to those cells, they are free to travel within the body, and they can end up in areas such as joints, the muscle tissue. They can even enter the vagus nerve and get a free ride up to the brain. When you eat food, there is a chemical reaction that takes place between the components of that food and your blood. If you happen to consume a particular food that contains a lectin that is not compatible with your blood type, and that compatibility is based on the research from this book, then a process called agglutination occurs. Agglutination is kind of like a clumping together, a mass of cells storing in a particular area, and they build up and they draw other blood cells into that area. Here's another way to describe it. Again, you're consuming a food that contains a lectin that is not compatible with your blood type antigen. Now, what follows from there is those lectins start to cause havoc. They start to attach to cells in the body, and depending on the lectin, it will target certain areas. Some lectins like to hide out in and around the joint cartilage. Some lectins like to hide out in the muscle tissue, and some lectins actually like to target specific organs within the body. And so they'll go to those areas and they'll just pull up stumps and stay there. And they'll keep drawing in other cells. So if you're continuing to have those lectins and they're attaching to cells and they're coming in together, it's like a magnet. They just keep drawing each other to those areas. Now, over time, your wonderful, beautiful immune system, which is always trying to sustain you and look out for any foreign invaders, anything that shouldn't be there. When it's doing its usual scans, it will come across this clump of cells and think, that shouldn't be there, that's not normal, that's not natural. We need to target that, we need to get rid of it, and that is in itself kind of like the body attacking itself, because they're simply just dead cells that have agglutinated or clumped together in a particular area. Now, given that lectins are widely abundant in a range of fruit, vegetables in particular, they're also contained in seafood, in grains, in legumes and nuts. It's very difficult to avoid them. It's not a case of, this lectins that you're talking about, they're not good for me, or these specific ones, I'll just avoid them. There are actually a lot of foods for each of the blood types that need to be avoided. But according to Diademo, at least being armed with the knowledge of the specific foods that contain the lectins that are not compatible with your individual blood type, you may be able to experience a wide range of benefits from that. Diademo states that if you follow a diet based on your blood type, where you're avoiding the foods that contain those lectins that are specifically not going to be compatible with your blood type, not necessarily all the blood types, or your neighbor or your partner or anybody else, but just you, there are a range of benefits, and those benefits can be increased energy, more efficient digestion, achieving your ideal weight, whether that's gaining weight or losing weight, and finally, being less predisposed to manifesting any health ailments within the body. So any diseases that you may be predisposed to, Diademo, through his research, believes that by following this particular diet, or at least avoiding the foods that contain those lectins, you can reduce the likelihood of manifesting disease within the body temple. Now, there are too many factors to consider between the 4 blood groups in just the one video. So following this video today will be 4 videos on each of the blood types, and I'll be providing a PDF that can be found in the description section of these videos that contains all of the avoid foods. Now, why am I doing this? Well, in all honesty, adhering to the blood type diet can be very restrictive, and it can cut out a whole range of foods that you probably really like. And so if you want to try this, if you haven't tried it before, or you may not have had success, the opportunity that I'm giving you today is to at least look at that list of avoid foods and consider whether they're staples in your diet. So for example, if you're a big potato lover, you like your steamed potatoes, boiled potatoes, baked potatoes on a regular basis, but let's just say that the lectin, and there is a lectin within the potatoes that can cause issues for particular blood types, blood type A, for instance, which happens to be me, you could obviously consider eliminating the potatoes for a certain period of time to see if it makes any difference. Or stay tuned for those episodes, because I have some solutions that may enable you to continue to have some of these avoid foods if they're just foods that you can't do without, or they're just a staple of your diet, or there aren't many other alternatives. And furthermore, following the protocol, so avoiding those foods for a particular length of time. It could be a few days and seeing how you feel after a few days, or it could be a few weeks even, and seeing how you feel after a few weeks. Has it made any difference to your symptoms? If it hasn't, okay, great. You've tried something, you've put in the effort, and you've done your own experiment, and that's really commendable. And if it has actually had a benefit, and I certainly have found benefits from it, then you can keep incorporating that into your life to achieve those greater levels of vitality, better digestion, and also reducing that likelihood of manifesting any of the predisposed diseases that your body or your blood type may have you predisposed to. Now lastly, a word of caution on a potential limitation of the research conducted by D'Adamo and his team. D'Adamo tested a wide variety of foods, and sometimes those foods were tested in a laboratory, and sometimes they were done in clinical research, so people actually consuming the food and then looking at their blood under a microscope afterwards. So there's not a lot of evidence in the book, or I certainly wasn't able to find any evidence of looking at the preparation of the foods. So if they were giving certain foods to the participants in the clinical studies, were they raw? Were they well cooked? This can make a huge difference to the amount of lectins that are actually available or left over or surviving at the end of the preparation process. So for example, when it comes to potatoes, like I mentioned before, maybe in the clinical studies the participants were given steamed potatoes, and sure, that would be something that I would like to know and take into account, because that's how I have my potatoes, steamed or boiled. But if the potato lectin was bought from a laboratory and it was added to the blood, and then they look under the microscope to see what the reaction is, well, that's open to debate, that's open to a whole range of questions, because the cooking process, as I've mentioned just before, makes a huge difference to the final amount of lectins that are left in the food. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to completely eliminate all the lectins, but processes such as boiling, steaming, pressure cooking, fermenting, these can all reduce the levels of lectins in the food quite considerably, almost to negligible levels. Therefore, just because you've got the foods on the avoid list and you're thinking, oh God, I'm gonna have to do away with bananas, for instance, which is another type A fruit which contains a lectin that causes my blood to agglutinate, to clump together. And I do feel that, I absolutely do. I feel quite sluggish and lethargic after a banana or two, unfortunately, even though I really love them and I know they're highly nutritious. So that was just something to consider in regards to the research. It is not a criticism. I am not here criticizing D'Adamo's research. The research must have taken a very, very long time. So full credit to him and the team for persevering, and the range of foods that they've tested is absolutely amazing. Huge ranges of seafoods, meats, vegetables I've never even heard of. So they've definitely put in a lot of time to this, and they've given us the data, and the data is then there for us to consider, to trial, rather than taking someone's opinion for it, rather than listening to a vegan going mad on YouTube, criticising D'Adamo about recommending meat and causing him a climate change denier and all this sort of stuff. Like, so much hate and so much projection on YouTube and social media and blog sites towards people that have just honestly done or focused in and specialised on a particular method of research. So finally, as I've said several times, there will be upcoming episodes, 4 of them, which will look at the blood type in detail, looking at the preferred range of foods, particularly the food groups that are either neutral or beneficial to your blood type. You'll have that list that you'll be able to download, which has all the avoid foods. And I'll also make a special mention of the particular exercise that is recommended for each of the blood groups as well. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. If you didn't get anything out of this video and you thought it was a complete waste of time, give it a thumbs down. It gives me that feedback. If you did get something out of this video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. In the meantime, look out for those 4 episodes coming up on each of the blood types. Have a look at yours, see what the information is, see if you'd like to trial this for yourself and be your own experiment. In the meantime, I ask that you keep well, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.